What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're continuing on my series of reviews for the Land Before Time series. If you guys are just now hopping on, we've covered the first 3 movies, and here we are now with the 4th film. I did not know there were 10 of these movies until I somewhat recently got the DVD collection that had all 14 movies, and I knew I had to cover this on my channel with a friend. So again, a big thanks to Mike from Did You See That for joining me here in this series, and let's continue on today with Land Before Time 4, Journey Through the Mist. Roy Allen Smith comes back one last time to direct one more installment here in this 1996 installment of the Land Before Time series, with a returning cast of people like Scott McAfee, Candace Hutson as her final performance as Sarah in this film. You also have people like Heather Hogan, John Ingle, and many others, with composing being done by Michael Tavera. I'd like to welcome you all back once again to another installment into the Land Before Time review series that I've been doing here on the channel. As I mentioned in the intro, I've been doing these with my buddy Mike from Did You See That? We're going to be hearing from him in just a moment as he shares his thoughts on the 4th installment in this animated series that's made for kids, that started in the late 80s, early 90s, and has continued all the way up to 2016, I believe, with its final and 14th installment. And as a kid, as I mentioned in these other videos, I love the original film, and I saw some of the sequels here or there, but I could not remember anything outside of a couple of characters and some small details. And at this point, I don't know about anything that's happening in the story, so I'm going into all these movies blind. It was really great to revisit the first one, and it's been fun to revisit the other ones, but unfortunately, they haven't really been great up to this point outside of the original film. That original film is so charming and classic, and it's so of its time, but knows what it is, and it felt like a revolutionary film in animation at the time, and it's definitely something that stood out in the movie world for kids back in that day. But yeah, all the sequels that would end up being straight to DVD or straight to video, as for when this movie came out, yeah, they haven't been great so far. So what do we think about this one? Well, let's get into the plot of this one, which I thought was actually quite interesting because the movie opens up and we're focusing on Littlefoot. It's nice to see Littlefoot and the gang once again here in this movie, which without a doubt is the part I enjoy the most about these movies, is enjoying these characters and spending time with them again, since I am nostalgic for them, specifically from those first 2 films. And so yeah, being able to just do any adventure with them now definitely puts a smile on my heart, as the little kid inside is kind of feeling nostalgic seeing these characters again. And so this movie opens up and we see that Littlefoot is looking over a canyon, and he notices a bunch of very familiar looking dinosaurs. They're long necks just like him, who are all coming in as a herd to the valley, the Great Valley, where our main characters are living. And we end up finding out that their land, where they've been coming from, has been dying out. It's been consumed by mist, it's been consumed by creatures and monsters and big dinosaurs, and it's no longer safe for them. And so they've had to continue to migrate and move around. Not long after their appearance in the Great Valley, unfortunately, Littlefoot's grandfather actually falls ill and is actually going to pass away, with the leader of this other long-neck group telling him that he's seen this kind of sickness before and that a lot of them don't survive, and that the only way to save Littlefoot's grandfather is to find a certain flower called the Golden Flower. However, she also follows up that information by saying that it's back in the land of the mist where they came from, and it's way too dangerous, and there's no way they're going to go back and help to try to get this flower for this old man, which is a damn shame. There's actually kind of a funny moment at one point. It just made me laugh while I was watching, as you have Littlefoot's grandfather on the ground looking dead. All the other long necks are looking over him, and they're kind of saying, who's going to want to go back there to get the golden flower? And one of the long necks just kind of shouts out as a background character, not me, oh no way. And it was just kind of hilarious. You have this old man dying on the ground. They know there's a flower that can save him, and somebody in there is like, hell no, not me, I'm not going back there. So anyway, as you can expect in this situation, Littlefoot and the gang end up going to try and find this flower in the land of mist. And in the mix, we have a brand new long neck young character that ends up making friends with Littlefoot, and that character's name is Allie. So it's nice to have a new person as a part of this team. And once again, in the similar fashion of the previous films, this film again touches on things like prejudice. Whereas in an opposite situation here, Allie doesn't really want to hang out with Littlefoot's friends because they're different from them, and they only really want to hang hang out with Littlefoot because he's also a long neck. But over the course of the film, Allie has to learn that Littlefoot's friends are great and that she should not have judged them on who they are or what kind of species they are. Again, leading into the idea of prejudice and different things like that that each of these films has touched on up to this point. And so as I mentioned, you have Littlefoot and the gang going to find the flower for the grandfather, and that's the premise here. So when the movie started, my fiance and I, who were watching these movies together, were kind of like, oh damn, like this movie seems like it's going to be far more serious. Right out of the gate, Littlefoot's grandfather is passing away. But as you can expect, by the time we get to the end of the movie, they do end up finding the flower and Littlefoot's grandfather is okay. I did really enjoy that level of stakes that was added there, as Littlefoot does have to hear a message about the circle of life here from his grandmother and be told to kind of prepare himself emotionally, because it's okay that we will lose people over the course of time, even if you miss them, and that they will always be there with you. So I almost feel like I wish they would have committed to Littlefoot's grandfather passing away, not for the sake of killing off the character, like I don't like him or anything, but because I feel like these films could really utilize some really strong messages like that, even though they have dipped into things like prejudice and definitely did tackle the idea of life and death in this movie. And it was kind of the stuff that I found myself the most gripped into, was the idea of Littlefoot having to accept the possible passing of his grandfather. Now, I do have some more to talk about, specifically my negatives, and before we do that, I want to go ahead and pass off the floor to my buddy Mike from Did You See That, and we'll get back to my thoughts in just a moment.
Perez, what's going on, man? Thank you for having me back once again in the fourth installment of the Land Before Time series, Journey Through the Mists, this time around. Now, I'm sure you've probably talked about the plot and everything kind of like that, so I'm not going to really touch into that, but one thing I just want to really bring up that I find really interesting about this fourth installment in particular is, firstly, it was the last time that Linda Gray voiced Grandma Longneck, as she did die in October of 1995. It's also the last time we get any of the original voice cast, as Candace Hutson voices Sarah for the last ever time, and it's also the last movie that Roy Allen Smith directed. So this movie already, I kind of felt like, okay, going into it, it's got a kind of a lot riding on it for all these lasts and final times of things. And after checking out this movie, I will say there's elements here I certainly enjoyed. I still think it's a mediocre movie. Like, the issue is, for me, is I've got to also kind of think with these movies, right, where they're intentionally made for kids. They're not made for me, a 32-year-old man. They're not made for Perez, nearly 30 years old, which I believe he's nearly 30 years old. These movies aren't really made for us. Back in the day, yeah, sure, because this came out in like 95, I believe, and I would have been 5 years old. So little Mike would have been like, woohoo! Awesome! This is great! This is the best thing ever! 32-year-old Mike's like, should have been a little bit more serious. But, you know, it's one of those things where I've just got to take the movie for as it is. Now, I do want to add here that we've got Juliana Hansen, who voices Allie in this movie. And it's also nice that we kind of get a little bit of an expansion in Littlefoot's family, as Allie is his cousin. And also the narrator does say, a little minor spoiler here, that we will see Allie again, which also kind of leads into a little bit of an excitement, being like, oh, okay, cool. They're setting up like a future installment here. What's going to happen in that installment? How is that going to play into in the factor? So I quite like this. Now, the underlying story here, I like the premise of this movie once again, where it's Littlefoot's grandpa this time, who's not well. He has to go on this journey to find this flower that can cure his grandpa. So already, I like that, the fact that they're kind of making the story a bit more personal. And the last positive I've got here, I've got to say, is I also like the song Grandma's Lullaby, which is the first song we actually get in this movie, which is definitely the best musical number that they've done so far in these kind of previous sequels that me and Perez have been speaking about. But in terms of my negatives here, is this movie's not for me. It's, you know, it's mainly for kids, so I can't really critique it too much, but I found myself a little bit bored at times with this movie. I found where, once again, we're kind of just recycling tropes once after another, where this time around we've got a crocodile who's a villain, and I'm just like, if not a crocodile, it's then a dinosaur, and it's like, who else are they going to make a villain? Why do they need a villain in all these stories? They should pay more attention to maybe more family matters and maybe emphasize more that the grandpa's not well and have those times and moments between Littlefoot and his grandpa where they're bonding a little bit more and it adds more to the stakes. But it doesn't do that in this movie. It kind of plays it safe. We get some kind of plot with like a sea turtle I didn't really care about, being honest with you, and trying to outrun a crocodile, and I was like, hell no, that's not happening anytime soon. And I just found this movie to be very generic. Like the other sequels, none of them have got a patch on that original movie, and unfortunately this one falls down kind of same rabbit hole. I'm intrigued to see where the other 10 movies are going to lead to, but that's for another time. I just want to say, Anthony, thank you so much for having me on once again, my man. Always a pleasure joining you, and I can't wait to see what the series brings, but also just love collabing with you, man, on your channel or mine. Anytime we get together, it's always creating some sparks and chemistry, my brother. So thank you for having me once again, and the floor is yours.
I'd like to once again say a big thanks to Mike from Did You See That for joining me here in this video, for the last 3 videos, and for the 10 that are coming up for the other installments. It's been a pleasure hearing your thoughts on this series so far, and yeah, we definitely have a lot of similar thoughts here. I definitely appreciate you breaking down also who was leaving this franchise after the previous installments and some of the last that this movie definitely had. And I am looking forward to seeing how I feel about the next film, as we'll have some new voice actors taking on some of these roles that we've been following, as well as a new director, which I'm sure will change the overall feel and vibe, at least to some degree, or at least at this point I'm hoping, because what I'm really hopeful for moving forward with the other 10 films in this franchise is to see something different, to see these characters really have to learn some serious things as the movies progress. Now, of course, as Mike said before, these are movies for kids that came out when I was super young. I wasn't even born when the first couple came out. I was born in 1993, so when this movie came out, I was only 3 years old. And so yeah, you know, these movies were definitely things I grew up watching, that were on TV often, that were things my parents would rent from Blockbuster for me, and whatever the case may be. So when it comes to these movies, I recognize full-heartedly that these movies are not for people like myself and Mike, but because I grew up with them, I feel like I'm able to come at them with a different approach as somebody who's critiquing them here and have a bit of a nostalgic energy for them, which is part of why I asked Mike to join me for them, because he did not have that nostalgic energy and is able to kind of give a little bit more of a detached review when it comes to his perspective on these movies. But as he mentioned, these movies are not for us, so 110% I do recognize that the things that really don't work at times, or that are really goofy and silly, of course, they're not going to work for us because they weren't meant for us. And I remember watching a lot of these movies when I was a kid and being really engaged in these characters, even if they were the most simple stories. As Mike mentioned before, there's been musical numbers. Specifically after the first film, each of these films has had musical numbers. And the second film has, I think, some of the worst music that I've ever heard in any animated musical, with absolutely horrible dialogue, no sort of actual like rhythmic cadence to the music. The actual lyrics themselves are laughable at times, and it has not been great. In the last film, I actually enjoyed that one more than the second one, and I enjoyed some of the songs in that one a little bit more. And this one for me was a little bit of a dip down in quality. I don't think the last one was that much better than this one, but I did find myself enjoying this one a tad bit less than that one, specifically also because of the musical numbers. There is one musical number that I enjoyed in this film, but it's not the same one that Mike actually enjoyed, because I actually was not a fan of the one that Mike enjoyed, but instead I enjoyed the one about the crocodile and its little bird companions, the villains of this film. They sing a song called Who Needs You, where they sing to each other. And at first I wasn't feeling the song, but over the course of it, I found myself more invested in it, and I found it to be a goofy, fun song for a kid's animated film of its time. But it's interesting to hear how I actually enjoyed that song, even if I agree with Mike that they don't really need to have villains like this in these movies, and it just feels like a shoehorned in element. But it is interesting to hear that he liked the grandma song more, where I wasn't really feeling that song too much, even if I could lean into the heart and charm of where that is coming from. Overall, this is a movie that knows what it is. It's silly, it's for kids, it's nothing crazy. In a lot of ways, it's a run-of-the-mill Land Before Time film. You can kind of almost blend the second, third, and fourth one in your head so far. There really isn't much that make them stand out too much, except for the fact that this one opened up with the possibility of Littlefoot's grandfather passing away, again, leaning into life and death, and Littlefoot having to maybe accept that. But again, it is undone later on, as they do end up of finding the flower, and I am curious moving forward if there ever will be some big game-changing things like death or anything like that moving forward in this franchise. And I definitely want to talk about Candace Hutson, who's played Sarah in all these films so far, with a lot of the other main characters being recast already up to this point. Candace Hutson had stuck around since the very beginning, so, you know, this is a farewell to her as the character of Sarah, who in this film, once again, was a bitch. Sarah has been such a rude and just condescending character throughout this entire series. And in the first film, you understand it. In the second film, you can still kind of get it, but she just continues to be this character that is just super unlikable. And it's kind of unfortunate because in the last film, I actually found her to be a far more kind character, and it was her dad that was the real asshole in that situation. But now with this movie, once again, she leans right back into her roots of just being a really terrible person and not really being kind to those around her, being incredibly selfish, even if she does come to help Littlefoot at one point in the film, but then she always wants to be patted on the back for everything that happens, which is just kind of ridiculous. As Mike mentioned before, there is a sea turtle character that appears later in the film who helps Littlefoot get away from the crocodile and bird villains in this movie. And yeah, you know, I didn't mind him. I know Mike said he didn't really enjoy that character too much. I don't know that he necessarily needed to be in the movie, but I thought he was a nice character, and I believe he was voiced by the same guy who voiced the grandfather, giving him continuous work throughout the course of the film, even though the grandfather character is half dead the whole movie. And as Mike mentioned as well, the movie wraps up with the fact that the herd is leaving, the Longnecks are leaving, which means that Allie is leaving with them as Littlefoot and his grandma and grandpa stay there in the Great Valley with everybody they've been living with. And so they definitely tease the fact that we will see Allie once again moving forward, which is something I'm excited for moving forward, is to see a lot of the characters that I know will start to be introduced, kind of growing this main set of characters that we're following. Because as a kid, I grew up with the main set of characters that you see on all the main set of posters, but I know that there are a few others that do appear over the course of time, so I am looking forward to seeing this group expand a little bit more and maybe falling in love with more of these other characters. But with all of that said, it's not a fantastic movie in any way, shape, or form. I don't really even think it's all that good of a movie. It's super bare bones. It's a middle-of-the-road film overall, but it does have some charming moments, and there were moments I found myself laughing throughout the course of the film, specifically because it's so silly and goofy and of its time, or there'd be these funny one-liners that a character would say that would make me laugh out of a just it's so cute kind of situation versus it being actually hilarious. There's also a moment in this film where Spike, one of our characters, actually speaks for the first time in the series, which I do hope is something that we get to see more moving forward, because in all the films up to this point and in my recollection of the character, he's never spoken. So to hear him speak in this was interesting. Didn't really think his voice was going to sound like that. But yeah, overall, I enjoyed a lot about this film. I enjoyed it on a nostalgic level, but it's not great overall. It's very dull at times. It's very run-of-the-mill, you know, even though I've talked a lot about certain positives that I enjoyed, and I enjoy this animation style as well. At its core, this is a movie for kids with a very bare-bones story that is really easily undone by the fact that they go and get the thing that they need to get to save the day, and there really isn't much about this that has heavy stakes. It's got pretty one-dimensional villains that we've seen before in a million movies like this, and there really isn't a whole lot about this movie that I feel is gonna really stand out when I watch another 4 movies in this franchise. I almost will probably promise that I will have forgotten certain elements of this movie, simply because, again, as I mentioned, you could almost cram 2, 3, and 4 together, and in a lot of ways they're very similar movies. So a big thanks to Mike for joining me here in this video. You can find the link to his channel, Did You See That, down below in the description box. Go give him some love, let him know I sent you. But for now, I'm going to wrap this up by saying a big thanks to you guys for watching, asking you guys to hit that like button, comment your thoughts down below. Are you a fan of this series? Are you a fan of this movie? Or do you not enjoy this movie? Definitely want to hear what you guys have to say down below, as well as hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel out, and I'd love for you to stick around and join me for more movie talk here on the channel. And yeah, I just want to say again, a big thanks to you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.